How's it going? Welcome to the Shebeen. It's Friday night. I'm here with Lauren. We're going to talk about Irish whiskey, distilleries, and their inaugural releases tonight. We hope you're all keeping well. Lauren, how are things?
All good over here. I hope everyone's keeping well. I see a few of the loyal listeners in the comments already, which is great. As always, everyone, you can give us a shout as to what is in your glass and where you're joining us from.
We are diving deep into a big dilemma that has come up this week, and that is the dilemma facing distilleries with their inaugural releases. So we're looking forward to diving into that tonight and talking about the challenges that distilleries face with their first ever whiskey and whether it can make or break them or do nothing at all. So we're going to examine all aspects of it. We're going to have a lively chat. We like having topics that are debatable, where there's no one answer. It's just a discussion where we'll agree to disagree over a whiskey.
Yep, and we found recently that these style of shebeens seem to be the ones that do best. The pricing one got so much engagement in the comments, everyone kind of throwing their 2 cents in. What was the other one? We did labeling as well. So we feel like the topics are, I mean, we're not one for sitting on a fence, put it that way. And it's good. These are the discussions that need to happen. And I feel like tonight in particular, it's a great topic to talk about with the amount of new brands, new distilleries that are popping up, and really how does a brand kind of stand out with their inaugural release to really engage with the consumer base and pull. So yeah, I'm looking forward to this.
You're all very welcome anyway. If you're just joining us, we're talking about distilleries and their inaugural releases. And I can see there's a great community of folks joining us again tonight from all across the United States and further afield, Ireland as well. We've got Matt in Missouri, who's drinking a drop of Quiet Man single malt. Kevin is drinking a drop of Green Spot Quail's Gate with an accidentally heavy-handed pour. Yeah, we've heard that excuse before, Kevin. Chris Connor still deciding. He'll see David Stewart in LA, blue spot in the glass. Good man, David. Bob Hurley is listening in the car while driving home from the casino. I hope you cleaned them out, Bob. Robert up in Dundalk has got a drop of Black Bush. Fair play to you, Robert. Lloyd has got Teeling, red wine, cash strength, and some of you are still on the way home, but you're tuning in anyway. Fair play to you. Who else have we got here? Troy's got Powers Aviation. Troy, I think you must be tuning in from the ski slopes there, are you? I saw you on the slopes earlier.
Yeah, I was just about to say, I'm pretty sure he is definitely on a snowy mountain somewhere or other.
Before we get into the lively discussion on pricing and positioning and releases, we want to give you some updates on some things we're working on at the moment in the world of whiskey. Lauren, you have a wee update for us as of today.
As of today, as of this afternoon, a wee update. Yes, we're delighted. You may have seen on socials already. Certainly, I've been chatting to a few people who are actually going on the trip. Our Northern Whiskey Lights whiskey bus has officially sold out as of this evening, which is fantastic. So we've got over 30 thirsty Irish whiskey fans joining us in September for 7 nights in Belfast, which will be our home for a full week. And we will reap the rewards of being close to so many incredible brands and distilleries within an hour drive, less in the majority of the time. So delighted about that. Really excited, especially for this one, because it's bringing everyone to my part of the world and showing off some of the great distilleries up north. So delighted.
And this is our 4th whiskey bus, and it's the first one that Lauren planned from start to finish. And big congratulations to Lauren on creating a great itinerary and pulling in favors from all her friends all around the north to give us amazing experiences. So fair play and congratulations. It's going to be a great time. And that's not the end of our whiskey buses or experiences. We've got a lot more in the works, a lot more being planned. We've also got our regular experiences available all year round on our website, irishwhiskeyexperiences.com as well. But that's exciting. And then the other whiskey bus kicks off in how many days?
21 days. Yeah, I was just about to say, I see Brian Faulkner in the comments there, and let's not take away from the one that's happening much closer to today, which is our Wild West whiskey bus. So 3 weeks today we will have already kicked off, which will be brilliant. Irish time actually will already probably be at the residence bar in the hotel, having enjoyed our welcome dinner and drinks in Napo Castle. So we're super excited for that one as well.
And between now and then, we've also got on my side of things, on my side of the aisle, we've got a big Ohio fundraiser Irish whiskey event taking place. I fly out to the United States on Monday, and I'm there for the week. And we've got some great. We're hosting 6 events or participating in 6 events in Ohio over a 48-hour period, would you believe, between myself and Kevin O'Gorman, the master distiller at Middleton Distillery, who flies out as well on Monday. And he's going to New York for an event first and then joining us in Ohio. We've got 4 great tasting events taking place to raise money for charities in Ohio. And we've got 2 participations in bottle signings and tasting samplings in as part of Ohio's real big promotion of Irish whiskey. They're launching 100 Irish spirits in the state over the next 4 weeks. And there's a big showcase taking place. So if you want any details of those events, you can go to ohlq.com. I'm going to put it in the comments here. Whether it's oh, that got loud there. I'm going to put it in the comments here. If you can make your way to Ohio, we'd love to see you at one of our events. We've got great samplings taking place, but also tasting some 48-year-old Irish whiskey with Kevin O'Gorman, master distiller, some silent distilleries, to raise money for 2 great charities in Ohio. So that takes place March 1st to 3rd. We'd love to see you. I think I recognize a few commenters here who are going to be joining us in Ohio, which is great as well. So what else have we forgotten about?
Well, I think there's a little something beside you there in the form of a bottle and a couple of cans.
Thank you so much for the prompt. Yes. Yes, I will be at the Chateau event. I will be there. We'll be there for about 2 hours at the Chateau event, Kevin and myself. So look out for us. It'll be just before one of our other tasting events. So yeah, I'll be there. Yes, we've got some items here that are being released in the next 7 or 8 days. This is our next Stories and Sips Whiskey Club bottling from 2 Stacks Irish Whiskey. This is arrived on my doorstep today. It's the first chance I've had it in my hand. And this is our custom blend that our Stories and Sips Whiskey Club members made. 4 different components in here: 40% single grain, 20% single malt, and 10% pot still, all of them in ex-bourbon, and then 30% single malt from a 6-year-old PX cask. And this is a 46% blend. And for the first time ever, we've got we've got cans of our whiskey, which is fantastic. So this is the 2 Stacks Dram in a Can custom canning for Stories and Sips, and that'll be available as well. So we're launching this probably a week from Monday. I suspect we're going to go live with this. So I'm very excited about this. I'll be sharing more details of this via email and social media with our Stories and Sips Whiskey Club. So anyway, that's all the advertorials out of the way.
Love that. I absolutely love the slightly new bottles with 2 stacks. I think they're gorgeous. The indentation of the 2 little gold
the embossing, of the 2 stacks, and it's a very light bottle, and compared to, it looks heavy. It looks super heavy, but it's so light. Great for shipping.
The colorway is beautiful as well, and those cans, the black and gold, gorgeous.
I know. Love
the cans. They're just so cool. So everyone can now bring them on, bring some lovely new cans on flights and up mountains and on hikes and wherever you see fit.
I've got my my flying drinks covered for going to Ohio. I just take the cans with me now, sorted. No problem there.
Get a cheeky upgrade. If you give one to the
handing them out.
Assistant. Yeah.
Somebody was telling me recently that the secret to getting an upgrade is to gift chocolate to the pilots and the air stewards when you board the plane, is to hand out lots of chocolate. I know a guy who has done it on almost every flight, and it has worked for him every single time. He hands chocolate to be given into the pilots. Yeah. I don't know if anyone's ever heard that before. I haven't tried it.
Surely is it not too late at that stage though? Unless they have availability.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Because I thought the one to schmooze would be the check-in assistant, because then she can upgrade you. Yeah.
Just walk through the airport handing everybody chocolate. Everyone you see, just on the off chance.
Just punch your arm at every stage. Yeah, sounds good. Yeah. You've got plenty of cans to do it with.
There you go. What inspired tonight's topic, Lauren?
So tonight's topic was inspired on Wednesday with the release of Rowan Co.'s inaugural liquid. their own liquid, which is a Solera single malt Irish whiskey. And it got us thinking. We can talk about it a little bit more detail in a second. We've covered the Solera system and how it operates in the world of sherry. And now it's been introduced, well, it's probably introduced in a few places across the world of Irish whiskey, but Roe & Co have been the first to actually come out right and say that they're using it as a method of maturation. So that got us thinking, how do distilleries and brands go about their inaugural release? So we're going to cover so much tonight in terms of the concerns that they have with price, with age, with the target consumer market, and so on and so forth. But that was really what inspired us and tonight's topic. And I think it's a really interesting one. And as always, we're very keen to hear everyone's thoughts on inaugural releases and how brands position themselves in an ever-growing world of Irish whiskey.
We're in a unique time period, I think, in the world of Irish whiskey, where we're witness to new distilleries coming online. We're witness to new distilleries eventually having whiskey that they can release because it's old enough. Our industry is kind of immature enough in that sense, whereas the Scotch whiskey industry wouldn't have as many new distilleries coming online as they have established distilleries, certainly as a percentage of their overall inventory. And so we're starting to see for the first time over the past, I would say, 5, 6, 7 years, what happens when a distillery releases something, the response to in the marketplace, the feedback, whether that's positive, whether it's negative, how that has started to affect the brand, whether it lays a foundation for growth, whether it creates some backlash.
Yep.
And we're really conscious that distilleries have a very tough time to get traction, gain a foothold, get established. Some have done it well, some have not done it well. And I think when we're looking at this tonight, I suppose my caveat would be, we don't want to appear in any way, and I don't think we would ever come across this way, I hope, but like that we're not cynical about some releases, but rather there's an objective perspective I'd like to bring anyway. And I know, Lauren, you said the same earlier, regarding how some brands have come to market, and maybe it's worth us having a discussion about the challenges they face and why they might come to the market in a certain way, and what it means for us as consumers, and the role we have to play in distilleries positioning, pricing, packaging their product, because every distillery that in 6 months or a year or 2 years time will release their own spirit is looking to the distilleries that are releasing theirs now and gauging the feedback and seeing what they might emulate or what they might try and avoid at all costs. So we're really curious to get your feedback on this as well. We don't have the answers. We have some perspectives, which I think is all we ever bring, really. No one would ever accuse us of having solutions, only perspectives.
We do, yeah, only perspectives, no solutions. You're not coming here to find answers. And I think, we've spoken about this before, as Barry said, I mentioned earlier, in terms of pricing and things like that. I genuinely do believe there is a place for every whiskey, but it's just reality that some releases are very successful and some brands are fantastic with how they roll out an inaugural whiskey or how they introduce their brand to the market, and others maybe aren't so successful. So it's more a kind of overview of, I guess, the potential problems and maybe a little bit of backlash and feedback that we have seen with certain releases or certain brands within the whiskey community. So yeah, very much a good discussion to be had.
All right, let's put up some very fancy, or should I say, slides prepared about 3 minutes before we go live.
No one needs to know that.
I'm saying the quiet parts out loud again, aren't I?
the internal thoughts are coming out. Right. I think as well, it's a great topic to talk about, because you mentioned, Barry, obviously Scotland has a little bit more of an established kind of whiskey industry, and still very, very early days for the renaissance, if you like, of the Irish whiskey industry, which does provide really fun opportunities for brands to break the mold, think outside the box a little bit in terms of their releases and their positioning. But it also is very, very hard because so many are coming to market at the same time, and it really is that question of how do you stand out and How do you offer something that is a little bit different than your competitor or the next brand? So very topical, I think.
We have an industry today that has approximately 46 Irish whiskey distilleries that are operating in terms of have commissioned, legal, fully approved stills that are producing whiskey, producing the spirit that'll become whiskey. And within that, more than half of them have yet to release their own whiskey. That'll give you a sense of how young the industry is. The industry we're looking at today is majority built on a post 2012 timeline. Dingle in 2012 really kind of being that dividing line between the old guard of Bushmills, Middleton, Kilbeggan, Cooley, could argue maybe even West Cork, but Dingle then kickstarting the modern Irish whiskey industry we would look at today. So if fewer than half of them have released their own whiskies, it's still such an early time for us to gather information from. But it's also a great time for us to maybe influence, or as consumers, help inform how future distilleries might release theirs. So when we think about new distilleries and the decisions they have to make, there are so many there, and what a range of distilleries that are out there, from heavily funded, multinationally owned distilleries to friends and family funded distilleries. And every distillery has a different story. Every distillery has a different financial situation. And every decision that's made is going to be based on the financial decisions of that distillery itself. There's no one answer that fits all, really, is there?
No, not at all. And it is that question of it ultimately is what the brand wants to do and what they can afford to do. I mean, we know, for example, those brands that maybe have decided to not release whiskey, that source whiskey, for example, and we know this is a case for a lot of distilleries, not just in Ireland. They'll release gin to generate a bit of income, because at the end of the day, if you're not releasing product, how are you making any money? So it's very, very personal. It's very individual to each distillery, and we'd be here all night if we covered all of them on an individual basis. But I guess that one of the main things when establishing a brand or a distillery, and you've timed this perfectly well, Barry, for the slide there, is do they source their own, or do they source liquid from another distillery? And of course, as we know by this stage, the majority of source liquid is Great Northern Distillery in Dundalk. Or do they wait and release their own liquid, so their own whiskey? So obviously a distillery has to wait minimum 3 years before they can have their own whiskey to be released into the market. So we've seen examples of some who have sourced, majority do, and we have also seen those who have decided to wait as well. So again, it's completely personal to the brand.
And I think it comes back again to that financial question, which is how funded and capitalized is the distillery. And a very important meeting early on in a distillery will be that question about whether they need funding for a period of time, or whether they've got enough to keep them going for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years, where they don't need to release any of their own stock, whether they just or they don't need to release anything, they just want to keep aging, maturing, or whether there's other streams of income. And we know that a gin craze was born out of, I was again point back to Dingle. I think Dingle kind of kickstarted it with their fancy balloon shaped glasses and everybody wanting gin and using gin to fund the distillery. And the folks in Dingle will tell you today that it's gin and vodka that keep the lights on, and still to this day, 12 years later. So the sourced versus the owned question is a big one, because it has so many repercussions down the line, which we'll talk about. Because once you establish a whiskey brand, whether it's sourced or your own, you're creating an identity, and whether that identity becomes your identity long term or not is going to be based on what you do afterwards, after you've established this first brand, and whether you keep that same brand later when you have your own spirit. And we'll talk more about that as well. So not every distillery sources whiskey. So let's talk about a couple that haven't sourced whiskey. What comes to mind to me immediately are the likes of Shorecross, so Redemin Estate Distillery. They haven't sourced any whiskey. Also, Waterford Distillery, never sourced any whiskey from outside. I would argue that Dingle 99% is their own spirit, but early on they had I'd say it was probably a pallet of whiskey that was like released in small miniatures, and maybe a couple of 700 ml bottles, but that was it, like before they ever had their own spirit, but such a small quantity. Who else can we think of that has not sourced liquid but are waiting?
To be honest, that those who have sourced far outweighs those who didn't.
Yeah.
You know, even brands obviously which we'll talk about later. The first one that comes to mind that is sourced is McConnell's. And they're having that discussion at the minute about brand identity, which we'll talk about in a second. But certainly, the absolute majority I can think of are sourced. If anyone can think of any more, they can let us know. But those were the two that came to my head as well.
Yeah. So that is the interesting discussion, right? The source versus the own. So, the Inaugural, when you source your whiskey, then you're bridging. You're trying to say, this is going to get us to this stage, but it's a double-edged sword because, as some distilleries have discovered, now you've got one source of income, but you've got two sources of costs, because now not only are you buying in grain to keep distilling your own, and you're paying the electricity, and you're paying for the water, and you're paying for the yeast, and you're paying for the employees and the insurance and all the operating costs with producing whiskey, you're also paying the ever increasing costs to source your whiskey. And some distilleries are discovering the challenges right now of doing both at the same time. And all distilleries who source whiskey are at the same time distilling. Otherwise, they're not a distillery, really, are they? They're just a brand that's buying the whiskey. So they have these costs associated with them. Question from Lloyd there: when a company uses sourced whiskey, is it made to their specs? It varies. It can be. Some of them will contract distill to their specs. Others are just looking for a bulk of something.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of them are looking for a bulk. Typically, it would be a blend in a lot of cases, to create a blended whiskey, probably due to cost, largely, I'd imagine. So, yeah, it can be both. It can be bulk buy of barrels they've sourced, either wild ex-Bushmill stock, ex-Cooley stock, whatever it may be, or, as you said, Barry, they can advise on what they would like.
That period of sourcing can be long. So I think of the likes of Ecklandville Distillery as an example.
Yeah.
So in 2025, their stock will be 10, 11 years old. Some of their unreleased stock that has never gone to the market. So they're a distillery that has, I think, now got 10-year-old stock, 10-year-old pot still stock.
They do. Yeah, they do.
And it has never been released because they have sourced Dunvilles from places like Cooley, etc. And they have Old Cumber that has been distilled majority there, but also has a little teaspoon of something sourced as well. So there's varying kind of time frames of how long sourcing can be undertaken, and this is the dilemma. These are all the dilemmas. Like, we're going to share all the dilemmas.
We'll probably jump back and forth. Yeah,
I know.
Yeah,
we are,
as well, because that's a great example. Ecklandville. It's do you let your own stock age for as long as you run out of your source stock? Do you kind of blend your source stock with your own? Do you release your own stock on its own? It's so many options, and as you said at the start, Barry, there's no right or wrong answer. It completely depends on the distillery's choice, the brand's choice, what they want to do.
And it's, I would hate to be running a distillery now, to be honest, because of not only the challenges of the logistics of the operating, but the going to market, and what happens when you get your product into the market for the first time. The feedback you get can be crippling and an awful blow if it doesn't hit the way you think it's supposed to hit. So if we think about the Inaugural, so you talked about Roe & Co as an example, and we're going to talk about various aspects of the Inaugural release, like pricing, packaging, age, availability, and timing. We'll come on to all these things. And even just looking at that price thing to begin with, sitting down in the distillery last week in Roe & Co and talking to Laura Hemme, the distiller, and she was talking through the Solera system, the complexities of producing a whiskey like this in a Solera system. A Solera system, fractional maturation. The whiskey is aged for 3 years in ex-bourbon barrels, and then it goes into a series of casks 3 months at a time, where you're partially disgorging where you're actually fully disgorging casks, taking a third of the liquid out, which leaves you a third of space in that vat, putting a third of other liquid in, and you're doing this 3 or 4 times to create fractional maturation, where over time your layers of whiskey are getting mixed between old and young stock. It's a really complex process, but they've come to the market with a whiskey that is the first of their own distillate that came to the market, and it's priced at, is it 85 euros? I think it's priced at.
€85, yeah, for 700 mils. Yeah.
So I said to Laura, I said, you've explained to us what it took to make this, and I think this is affordable based on what I now know. But within 24 hours on looking online, I could see dozens of comments saying how ridiculous a price that is. That is 50 euros more than we should be spending for a 4 or 5 year old whiskey, 30 euros too expensive. And people slating this. Now, at the same time, there are whiskeys out there that are 4 and 5 and 600 euros for a 3 and 4 year old whiskey, which is going to liven up our debate a little bit and the discussion here about what is the sweet spot. And there's no one answer because it's so different for every single distillery.
I think so too. And realistically, as much as we've said so many times, and we'll continue to say this until we're blue in the face, genuinely there is a whiskey for every price point. It's fantastic that we're seeing certain super rare whiskies, ultra aged whiskies entering into the market, which may not be for everyone, and we've said before as well, that's okay. But ultimately, I think if you release your inaugural whiskey at a high price, 90% of the time, you're probably going to alienate the majority of your potential customer base. At the end of the day, I think all of us, we love our whiskey, and we might be a bit more inclined to spend a little bit more money on whiskey. That's not the reality for the majority of people. We've said this before. So I think if you don't hit that price point, or you're not going to be able, not that you won't continue, but I think you'll find it hard to regain a little bit of your kind of customers.
So let's talk about the inaugural release, because for a distillery, it is the sum, it is the product, it is the culmination of what might have been a decade of work or more. Planning, fundraising, building, distilling, maturing, and then eventually you get this point where you are so excited and you want the world to be as excited as you. And guess what? They're not. And they're not as excited as you. Do you know why? Because it's your dream, not theirs. And it's not the consumer's dream that you did this thing. And it's not the consumer's responsibility, perhaps, arguably, to fund the distillery based on a 600 euro or a 500 euro or 400 euro release, because you need the funds to build your distillery. And so it creates all kinds of upset and discouragement, and the distillery might feel nobody cares, we've wasted our time, we've wasted our money, we've come to market with the wrong thing, nobody wants us, what a difficult market this is. So the inaugural release is the thing that the distillery, the brand, the family, the company has been waiting for so long. But most people will not respond favorably to it if a number of things haven't been put in place, which we'll talk about in a little bit, like the community building aspect, the transparency, the journey, the awareness of the inputs of costs, the understanding of why a thing is priced a certain way. So what we'll do here is and we're jumping all over the place. We'll talk about the challenges. We'll talk about the dilemmas that are facing distilleries, but we'll also talk about some ways I think that distilleries and brands could maybe increase their chances of a better reception.
Yeah. But I think you're saying about jumping all over the place. It is such a dynamic topic, and there's so many things interlinked with each other, and so we will be going back and forth a little bit. But I was genuinely surprised, actually, as you said, Barry, to see a little bit of kind of kickback for the price of Rowan Co.'s inaugural release. But then I think we might be looking at it with different eyes, because for me, I think they've nailed it, because it's a good price for what it is. They came out with something different. The Solera system, which, as we said, typically used in sherry, hasn't really been talked an awful lot about in the Irish whiskey industry. It's something different, which sets them apart. But then, does that difference for people who maybe aren't in the know and don't understand it, does that alienate them a little bit? And maybe they don't quite get it and they don't know what Solera is. So I think we have to also appreciate that we and many of us in our community look at things a little bit differently than most people. We're not normal. We're the exceptions here.
You're certainly not anyway.
No.
I was having a conversation with somebody during the week who shared an interesting statistic with me that in 2023, the Irish government approved 1,000 whiskey labels in the Irish whiskey category. 1,000. So when
Insane.
like that is it's the highest, it's the most it's ever been approved. So when you think about a distillery who has spent, and I'll create a hypothetical husband and wife, they've built a distillery, they've got their family involved, they've gone out, they've raised money, they put their life savings into it. They've spent 5-10 years building a distillery, this hypothetical couple, and they come out with what is their beauty, their work of art. They've commissioned somebody to design the bottle and shape, and yet they're not just competing against other distilleries, they're competing against somebody with a better story that sourced a whiskey from West Cork. They're competing with somebody who sourced a whiskey from Great Northern Distillery. They're competing with 1,000 or 999 other brands, other expressions in the marketplace, despite the fact that this couple have had all the inputs of cost. So on that point of price, let's start with that, as we've kind of started to skim it already. There is a full range of inaugural releases coming to market over the past 2-3 years, and they range from anywhere from, I think, as low as 59 or 60 euros all the way up to the highest I've seen for an inaugural release is 595 euros. Now, price is an awful metric, but it's the thing we defer to because it's the constant that we think, well, because I know how much I have in my pocket, I know how much I'll spend.
Yeah.
But it doesn't in any way explain to us what it cost to get that thing to us and what they need to charge to make that money back.
Yeah, we're just seeing it as the kind of the statements released of the new launch, or you see it online, or you see it on the shelf of an off license or a liquor store, and you're thinking, that price for that age? I think again, it's the weighing up of price versus age, I think, is the one that always comes into it. It's, yeah, you definitely don't appreciate what, as you say, Barry, has gone into releasing that whiskey, I think, in an awful lot of cases. And honestly, I think a lot of people are very quick to slate a whiskey at a higher price. If it's not for you, it's not for you, and that's okay. I think it sounds like a broken record saying that, but it does make me a little bit sad to see that certain brands take quite a while to recover from maybe an inaugural release that hasn't quite hit like they thought it would, which is a shame. But
so I saw some commentary during the week about pricing online around Irish whiskey, and somebody made a comment that a lot of people applauded and liked, which was, if a 4 to 5 year old whiskey like Jameson can be brought out for 29 euros a bottle, then to this person who made the comment, they claimed then that's their metric for what whiskey should cost. In other words, if a 4 or 5 year old whiskey can cost 29 euros, Black Bush, another example, then that is the metric. And what that awfully simplistic observation fails to account for is, you take Jameson, a distillery where most of the plant was installed in 1975 and paid off a few years later. You have the economies of scale of a distillery doing 120 million liters of pure alcohol every year. You've got one of the world's biggest drinks companies and their distributors behind it, and hundreds of millions of investment that has gone in and will continue to go in to funding the growth of this brand, and perhaps allowing for smaller margin over a wider scale, like the Walmart effect of, they'll happily take 2% margin across the board in Walmart, and they'll still make billions of profit every year because of the quantities sold rather than the individual bottles. So was it last year 120 million bottles of Jameson were sold globally? So when you sell 120 million bottles of something, a brand trying to sell 50,000 of something or 800 of something cannot get anywhere close to the economies of scale and price.
And I think, again, we talk about this a lot too, is the education. I think there are still a lot of people out there who just aren't aware of this. And as you, the economies of scale that is involved with certain releases like Jameson, what Middleton are filling, is it just under 8,000 casks a day? Is it something crazy?
3,000.
3,000. And you look at, you turn your head to the likes of Brendan Carty at Cologne, who's maybe doing max filling 2 casks a week. And people don't understand that because they're so used to the big names in the industry like Jameson, Bushmills, and they think that everything should be based around that. And to be fair to them, for a long time it was, and for a long time there was only Blackbush on offer. Jameson was sitting there, and it's cheap to drink. They're good whiskies, and I think what people have believed and known for a very long time is being challenged, and with that comes a challenge of getting them to look at things a little bit differently.
I couldn't agree more, and that price and age comparison is a massive hurdle for new distilleries to overcome. When a 3-year-old whiskey, let's say a distillery is able to bring a 3 or 4-year-old whiskey to market at €79, I'll take that price point as an example, then a valid comment might be made, but sure, I can get a bottle of Redbreast 12 for less than that. Now, you can, but the question is that how we should be measuring, or is that how we should be evaluating a whiskey? Now, some people would say, well, you have to pay to support the growth of the industry. And others would say, that's not my job. My job isn't to support the industry. I just want a whiskey that I like. Therefore, I'm going to go to this thing that's the cheapest. I'm choosing based on price. So the whiskey companies and the distilleries they're hamstrung by this decision-making process, which makes, because they're not funded anywhere near the way Bushmills, Middleton, even a Rowan Co, I would argue. Rowan Co is part of Diageo, one of the biggest drink companies in the world.
Yeah, exactly.
So they're able to get this product out still at a price lower than any other distillery can possibly get Solera system whiskey out.
Exactly. And I think as well, like, though, ultimately here as well, you cannot tell someone that their belief is wrong. If someone wants to only spend $40, $50 on a bottle of whiskey, that's absolutely fine. And it might just mean that the brand, a smaller brand like Short Cross or like Cologne, just isn't for them. And then the other side of that is the likes of Short Cross and Cologne, excuse me, should not be made to feel like they have to release something at a lower price point just to appeal to the masses. You know, they should never feel like that's I know. I think they have to conform to, you know, everyone has their own USP, and that's completely fine.
And Tom has a good question. Do whiskey bonders then have a leg up on new distilleries coming to market? And just to take that one very quickly. So there's only, I think, 4 whiskey bonders in Ireland right now. And a whiskey bonder has their own bond, which is a license from the government to store whiskey in a bonded facility, licensed facility, regulated and inspected facility where whiskey can age in a deferred taxation environment. No tax is due on that until it leaves the bonded facility. JJ Corrie is one. W.D. O'Connell, W.D. O'Connell is another one. 2 Stacks Irish whiskey is another one, and I think it's the Liberator in County Kerry. But also, well, there's also bonded facilities in the likes of you take Staffords and Wexford. But there's a small amount of them. Most bonds are attached to distilleries. Now, there are independent warehouses that you can do it in. But bonders are not just people storing casks. They're actually aging, maturing, blending, producing the whiskies based on stock they've bought in. And while they have a leg up, in my opinion, on speed to market and access to variable flavor profiles, they're completely at the mercy of the rising costs of sourced whiskies, which you talk to any whiskey bonder, they'll tell you how many price increases they've had in the past 24 months, which would blow your mind. In some cases, double the cost of what it used to be 24 months ago. So there's pros and cons to it. A distillery at scale can produce for, a single-digit percentage of the cost that a bonder can produce a whiskey.
Exactly. Ted has also made a great point there. The craft distilleries can't target someone who is indiscriminate on taste and focuses on price. That's exactly what I was getting at as well. You know, if a smaller distillery discovers that maybe this isn't their target area, that's absolutely fine. They can kind of yield to target a certain demographic of people who maybe are whiskey drinkers, you know, certain clubs and societies that are willing to pay a little bit more, like ourselves. It's all, I guess, until a distillery releases something, they're never really going to know what works for them, or what hits and what doesn't hit, and what lands and what doesn't. It is a risk. It's a massive risk. And I think it's safe to say, as you said earlier, Barry, I think Jennifer Nickerson from Tipperary Boutique put us all off ever wanting to start a distillery with all the costs and the fears of going to market. So we're all scared off. No fear.
This is a picture here of the inaugural release from Burren Distillery. And many of you will not have heard of Burren Distillery because they've not really shared their story beyond a very small circle of people. They're based in County Clare in the Burren, and they released their inaugural whiskey late last year. And what you're seeing on the screen there is a €595 inaugural whiskey, maybe the most expensive inaugural whiskey that has been released in Ireland. And there are, I think it's 2,000 plus bottles available. Yep. It's not a single cask. It's a vatting, a marrying of malts from various casks. And I share this on the screen as an example of what happens when you go to market at a price point that, at any price point, what should you expect? Well, you should expect, if it is too high, you should expect people to tell you that. If it is very low, you should expect people to say that's a great price. If it's just what people are expecting, you should expect almost no engagement at all. So in this case, the Burren got hundreds of comments when they released this. So many comments, in fact, on their Facebook and their social media that they started to delete many of the comments that were on their social media because they had to give up responding, because such was the backlash about the price and how out of sync it was with what people felt the pricing should be.
Yeah.
And their response was that there'll only ever be one release of an inaugural whiskey, even though there's 2,400 bottles. And there will never, it's a special moment, and therefore it's priced accordingly. Now, I'm not an economist, but I would argue that the market will ultimately decide what's right and what's not right. If this sits on the shelf for the next 10 years, maybe they weren't right with their pricing and the market decided. If it sells out, which it hasn't done, I suspect they'll discover that it was maybe priced too high for the size of the market. But like you said earlier, Lauren, there's no incorrect price. There's only an incorrect price that doesn't find its audience.
Yeah, exactly. I think this was probably the one of the most sort of negatively responded to releases I've personally ever seen. And it's hard to see as well, because at the end of the day, you don't want anyone to kind of be experiencing that level of backlash. But I think this is where, and we'll come on to this, that building your community and getting yourself out there, whether it's a brand ambassador, the founder of a brand, maybe before you release something, is so important. Because if you don't find your people, it's very hard for them to find you sometimes. So I think that was also possibly an example of where this could have went a little bit better.
But it's also back to that decision about, when we talk about the distillery's dilemma, this new distillery, perfectly legitimate, he wants to make the money back on the investment they've put into building a distillery. And the decision they've made to get that money back is sell casks as kind of investments, but also price whiskey at a certain price, because it's time to make some of this money back. Maybe it's taken us longer to get to market than we expected. Our costs have run higher than, as they always do, than we initially planned. Therefore, we need to charge this. But that never means that the audience is ready to spend the amount of money you need to pay off the debts you've incurred to build the distillery to make this whiskey.
Exactly. Yeah. And if they're not aware of that and they don't know, and a lot of people, maybe this was the first time they'd heard of the Burren, and this was the first release they saw, and it was kind of like, oh, okay, this is interesting. So yeah, it's, as you say, Barry, it's everything to the distillery, but it might not be as much to the consumer who has to spend the money on buying it. So
now the other side of it is, if we're just comparing price to liquid and age, we're ignoring what happens with many inaugural releases, which is specialty packaging and a presentation that is designed to be maybe a keepsake, a generationally passed down heirloom of whiskey history, which we can all point to. I mean, if any of us had a bottle of whiskey from 1825 when the Middleton Distillery was first built, and that package that was handed down from generation to generation, we'd be very wealthy now that we had this thing. Now distilleries are also coming out with their own versions of this commemoration, whether it's glassware, whether it's style of bottle, whether it's specially commissioned artists that produce a piece to go with it. Packaging can attract people to buy an inaugural release as well, if it's maybe something that would be considered an investment. But where is the line between, are people, do you think, buying inaugural releases above a certain price point to drink, or is there a price point where they become collectible and they'll never be opened?
That's the thing. And I think we've seen, so that's actually a really interesting point, because me personally has seen this with the likes of the Bushmills Causeway collection, like the first release of that. So I guess the inaugural release, if you like, of the Causeway back in 2020, bottles were being opened. It was being enjoyed, sold out very, very quickly. Certainly the younger of the two releases, or not the younger, the less expensive of the two releases. But then as it went on, and people were starting to twig that actually this is a collection that I could then sell for a lot of money, it started to be collected more than it was opened. And it was a very distinct shift.
Yeah.
The same thing happens with the likes of the Middleton Very Rares and so on. It just happens that people, I think, reach a certain point that they think, I could make a lot of money back on this. And in a way, that is frustrating. That definitely is the one thing I'm not on the fence about. I think whiskey should be enjoyed, should be opened. But I mean, who am I to tell people who are bottle flippers and don't want anything else to do with the whiskey? But
It does
I
allow
would
the
say,
price
though,
to. No, please go on.
No, I was just about to say, I would say, though, the packaging. I love a good packaging on a whiskey, but I don't think that is what would be the hook in selling an inaugural whiskey, for example. I don't think that would be the decision between buying it or not buying it.
I think people look at the likes of inaugural releases that are in specialty packaging, like this one here, Sleeve League's Kilcar release, as something that they would hope to keep on the shelf. Now, I know some people have bought these and opened them. I also have seen them on auction go for 3 or 4 or 5 times their price that they were bought for. And I think there is a cohort of whiskey purchasers. I don't know if some of them are consumers. They're just whiskey purchasers who will buy to then immediately get it on auction because they were lucky enough to be drawn in a ballot, for example, for an inaugural release. So this is, again, back to the distillery's dilemma. Do we come up with specialty packaging? Do we not? Do we have a mainstream release? So if I look back at this slide here, we talk about availability. I'm not sure how many of this Roe & Co. Is available as the inaugural release, but I do know that it is inaugural and core at the same time.
Yeah, I don't think it was actually disclosed how many
No.
bottles were available. The packaging's actually, it's another great point, and someone's just reminded me in the bottle. Ted's just said that's a shelf space killer. I think he was referencing the Sleeve League bottle. I do think there is also the side of it that the shape of a bottle can annoy people. Like, I've seen negative responses to the West Cork, the circular bottle, like the little glass that floats. People are like, I can't hold this, I can't pour it. The Sexton's another one. Everyone says this dribbles everywhere, I can't pour this. So I mean, that's another thing you could also get wrong is the packaging. So never mind the price and your customer base. If you don't even get the packaging right, it's not going to go well for you. Matt's just
and then the decision around availability. So there are many distilleries. We'll take Cologne as an example, that and Waterford as an example. Their inaugural releases were both single cask or very small run expressions. And when they were gone, they were gone. Now, that's a double-edged sword because you're not going to make a whole lot of money from a single cask. You're also going to annoy people who can't get hold of your inaugural release, but you're also going to create such conversation and FOMO around this small release. What do you do? You're now handed the keys to the distillery, Lauren. You've built a distillery. Are you going with single cask, or are you going to go wider and say my inaugural release should also be a core, always available release?
You've actually just read my mind, because I was thinking there, for an inaugural release, do you think maybe if it is limited, let's say I'm literally pulling this out of the air, 180 bottles, okay? Does that drive people to want to buy it because they think, oh my God, there's only 180 bottles ever of this thing and that's it done. I can have a chance to own a piece of liquid history. Whether or not I'll open it or whether or not I'll keep it, that's entirely down to the customer. Whereas the likes of the Burn with 2,000 odd bottles, do they think, that'll not sell out anytime soon, I'll maybe hold off on buying it. And then the next release comes along that's $40 a bottle and everyone's gone to that when they've forgotten about the more expensive release. Do you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I would tend to go for an inaugural release. I think I would go one that would always be available as a core range whiskey, because that's your foundation, and then everything is built from there. I think I'd go that way.
Have conversations with Jarlath Watson at Ecklandville Distillery, who's talked about when they released their inaugural own spirit, they wanted to be widely available, because what's the point in releasing a thing that's in short supply? And the same with Clonakilty Distillery. So in May, Clonakilty Distillery will release their inaugural pot still whiskey, but they'll also release it as a core global release, available in the United States, available in Europe, not just a single barrel. Now, there may be a cast strength version of their thing along the way for those who want to collect something else. But the availability is a big question. And you're not going to make your money on a single cask at a time as a small distillery who's put all the expense into building it. That's a fact.
I also think as well, the bottom line, certainly to this element, the price, the packaging, age, all of this, is you cannot win. A brand cannot win here, because you're always going to annoy someone. There's always going to be someone, and it's always the keyboard warriors that shout louder than everyone else in any situation. So people who are annoyed at the price, annoyed at the age, annoyed at the availability. I used to get this all the time on the neck about, this should be available globally for whiskey fans. This isn't fair that it's specific or exclusive to a certain market. So bottom line, folks, you can't win. You can't please everyone.
That's it. We're tearing up the plans for the Stories and Sips Distillery. It's not happening. At the end of it, Lauren has poo-pooed it.
Good night, everyone. That's it, Don. You can't win, bottom line.
See you next week. You can't win. And it's almost as if it's the distillery's dilemma.
Almost.
No, these are the problems. So these are the decisions you have to come up with an answer along the way. The other thing is timing. When do I go to the market? I've witnessed, and Lauren, you've seen the same, distilleries release a product in the middle of an onslaught of products into the market, where let's take a pre-Christmas launch, for an example, October to December, big launch window for brands launching an inaugural product in there. I've seen them get lost where nobody has the money, or they're competing for social media space or space in magazines against everybody else. So timing is a huge issue for the inaugural release as well. And again, you can't win. You'll get it wrong more than you'll get it right.
And the thing is as well, like, and this is also it's a harsh reality, but it's a true reality as well. And I guess brands, let's say smaller brands, for example, I'm literally just going to use cologne again as an example. Let's say they maybe go to market on the exact same week as the likes of a Middleton Very Rare or a Redbreast release. It's always going to be slightly overshadowed possibly by a bigger brand who has a wider reach, which is it's really sad to see, but it is just the reality of it. And I think as well, Barry, just to mention about the pre-Christmas release, there was, I think, was it 4 or 5 whiskies released in 1 week in December leading up to Christmas. And it's kind of like, where do you go? Like, not everyone is in a position to be able to afford all 4 whiskies at one time. And then the other thing is as well is, at the start of the year, January, February, people maybe don't have any money left post-Christmas because they spent it all going out and buying gifts and presents. So it's like, you can't win there. we're very negative tonight, aren't we?
Yeah, it's getting awfully depressing. This is as depressing
honestly.
as Tipperary distilleries talk about the cost of running a distillery. We're up there in that level of depression.
Depression, doom and gloom.
But let's talk about something we touched on earlier. So building the audience for an inaugural release. We've seen great examples of distilleries that have taken us on a journey, that have brought us along almost from inception. And I'm going to be curious to get your thoughts, Lauren, and also the audience's thoughts on what made that distillery so attractive to people, and why did a certain distillery get such a following or get such an audience so early, so that when they did launch, they had a captive audience ready to buy. But we see the difference between brands and distilleries that take the time to invest in building an audience one person at a time, and those that are, whether they like to be or not, they're just too busy or don't have the interest to actually do the forward facing stuff because they're too busy making whiskey.
Yeah. I think, and this is true for so many scenarios in life, not just the alcohol industry, and more specifically the Irish whiskey industry. Ultimately, people buy into people. If you're someone who is super passionate about not necessarily a brand that you founded, but a brand you represent, something you've produced, the liquid you have, you're very engaging with people, you're in comment sections online, you're very vocal on social media. Ultimately, people will fall in love with you and your story. And I think there's we've kind of already mentioned this. One example, which this is about the fifth time I've mentioned him, I'm not on the payroll of Cologne. Brendan Carty is a perfect example of this. He's front and center at most whiskey festivals. He's the one who hosts the master classes at festivals and at society tastings and things like that. And people have ultimately fallen in love with him and his story. The fact that he came out of the gate, he pushed boundaries, challenged us and things that we believed for so long, that whiskey had to be a little bit older and super aged to contain so much flavor. And Brendan has just flipped everything on its head, and he's done it in such a fantastic way. And we're seeing that in the loyal base that he has. The Cologne cult, the lads at Two Stacks are fantastic at this as well. They've been on the ground, they've engaged with people and communities, and they have just done it so well, and they are reaping the rewards of it. And it's as simple as that. People have bought into their story and their brand. That's
and
great.
a great example of that in action was prior to Cologne launching their first whiskey. And again, like you said earlier, Lauren, two casks a week if they're lucky. Prior to the launch of their inaugural whiskey, they had to go to great lengths to explain, folks, there's going to be far more demand for our whiskey than we have whiskey available. And then at the same time, there are other distilleries in Ireland saying, I wonder, will we ever be able to sell out of our inaugural single cask? They both took the time to build a distillery. They both took the time to invest in it, and the people and the product and the ingredients, etc. But the difference you touched on there, yes, front and center at whiskey festivals, open and honest and transparent and curious and interested and willing to give insight and information on the distillery, as Brendan Carty is. But also I think something very, very important that I've seen develop a huge community is a stake in the ground of a belief. Brendan Carty believed that old flavor profiles were lost due to a modern technical file. And he made it his mission to try and get that changed, but be very vocal about why it should be changed and why he disagreed with its current definition. That attracted people who wanted to kick over the table as well. They're like, yeah, Brendan, go on, you mad, whatever. We're with you. Now, if you don't have a point of view, if you don't stand for something, the whole old saying, if you don't stand for something, you'll kind of fall for anything. You need something that somebody can hold on to. Absolutely. And if you're making whiskey, congratulations, but there was 1,000 whiskey labels were approved last year. We need more. What else have you got?
Yeah.
I also like what JJ Corrie, Louise McGran did to build her whiskey bonding business. She's not a distillery, but when Louise McGran launched, Louise took out her phone every chance she got, and she videoed herself in her farm, whether it was with her dogs or her ponies or her barrels being delivered. And she brought us on a journey of somebody building a whiskey bonding business. And it was fascinating. And when she launched her first whiskeys, they were all sold out. So this community aspect is overlooked. And I'm always worried when a distillery or a brand puts a line item in their budget that is marketing agencies, as opposed to a better phone that they can carry around and just connect with us directly. And I tell you, it'll go a lot further than a photograph that took 2 weeks and 10,000 euros to produce that says made from the finest barley and hand selected casks.
100%. Yeah. Or the pose, like looking up to a glass, like that. It's not as relatable as you say. It's just someone getting down and dirty with their barrels and their whiskey and what they're doing. Dahi O'Connell is a great example of that as well. Like every other day you see a video of him going up and he's chatting through one of his whiskeys and he's just having the crack around his warehouse, like, and it's funny. Like ultimately it's funny, he's relatable, and it does well for him. And I think as well, I mentioned this at the beginning, Brandon, and he does right, and same with the Two Stacks lads, they're not trying to appeal to the masses. They're not playing it safe, and by doing so they found their niche and they found their people, and that is ultimately the whiskey heads, the whiskey community, and it's serving them very, very well, and it's brilliant.
Let's talk about the going to market piece then. So you've got your inaugural whiskey, you've priced it, you think, look, I need to sell this many bottles to make back my investment to this stage. I've got all my fancy designers and agencies working on things, and we're now going to go to market. And we have seen, and I don't want to be critical unnecessarily of brands, but there have been examples of distilleries going to market with inaugural releases that were overpriced, and they flopped when they went to market because they didn't have the community built, and nobody understood why a product should be that price for a brand that, in the words of the community, I've never heard of you, and here's your pricing. And we could point to examples we've shared already tonight as an example here. But going to market, so many ways to do it. But again, the distillery's dilemma is how to go to market. Brendan Carty was able to say, I'm going to have far more people to buy my whiskey than I have whiskey. And other brands are going to be wondering, how can we acquire customers? How much do we have to pay to acquire a customer through Google ads and Facebook advertising and on and on and on? Where would you start? I mean, what a challenge.
It would be an absolute minefield to try and navigate this, because there's the question of, do you do a little bit of consumer research? Maybe you, let's say you're maybe a slightly more established. Well, no, we're not talking about established distilleries. We're talking about inaugural releases. Never mind. Let's say you do a little bit of consumer research. So let's say you maybe go to a whiskey festival. Let's say you have sourced whiskey and you do a tasting with your core range of sourced whiskey, and maybe you add in a little bit of your own product, for example. Do you do a little bit of market research that way? Do you gauge the feedback on it? Do you think, okay, this could be something that does land? Do you tease it on socials? Do you build up to it and then you release it? You're transparent about the price point, so on and so forth. I do not know where I would start with this. I think I was going to say it's the hardest. Everything's hard.
Well, I remember Few Stacks going to market in the United States not long after they launched in Ireland. And I remember talking to the lads, and it was during COVID, and we had the lock-in every, Friday night at the time. And I said, look, why don't we build a thing around your launch in the US where we can go to market? We'll help you go to market, but we'll have a bit of crack around it. Musician, we'll package up whiskey, we'll do all kinds of things that will help you go to market. And they were all mad keen to engage people. They wanted people to talk to. They weren't interested in just, let's run advertising campaigns. And I would argue that night that we did that created a lot of traction and got a lot of interest and awareness for people who saw them joining in with a bit of crack they were having every Friday night. And suddenly here's this new brand, and it warmed them up to the audience who saw them also engaging the way we were engaging every Friday night. And so, like, you go back to that building the community. If you've built the community, going to market is just a matter of saying, and now the thing we've been talking about for 2 years is available, and that's your going to market.
Exactly. Like you drop a post into the Two Stacks Nation and everyone's going mad about a release.
I know.
That's what I mean. They've done it perfectly. They really have.
So then, like, we've talked about this inaugural release that is their own distillery's own distillate and the dilemmas the dilemmas facing them and the challenges they have to overcome and decisions they make along the way. But for many of them, they have sourced whiskey at the same time, and they're now faced with the new dilemma, which is, I have whiskey that tastes a certain way because it came from one distillery. I have whiskey that tastes another way because it came from my distillery. What do? Do I blend them together? Do I, what do I do here? So we have one last night on Stories and Sips. We had a great interview with Brian Nation, master distiller, former master distiller of Middleton Distillery, who's now leading the charge in America, in Minneapolis, with O'Shaughnessy Distilling. And we asked him that same question. How do you move from a sourced whiskey that you have now to a whiskey that you will have in 2 years' time that's your own distillate? How do you think about that? And we have a little clip from that I think we should play and let people know how Brian thinks about it. I don't know that he answers it, but he talks about how he thinks about it.
Yeah, it's a great point.
Beer starting to finally have their own spirit. They're releasing their own whiskies into the market, and they're having to face the tough decision of deciding what to do with sourced whiskies that brought them to that point, their own distillate, their own whiskey coming on the market. Do they keep the two together? Do they go on a separate track? How do you think about that for yourselves and planning ahead for the next year and a half, 2 years?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think we're in a unique, I would call it almost like a unique situation in that what we're releasing at the moment, which is our blends of Irish and American whiskies, they will stay consistent as source SKUs. Yeah, we will always have them on the market. We will release all of our American single pot still, our triple pot distill rye, and our American triple pot distill bourbon. They will be released as individual SKUs under the brand Keeper's Heart as well. So we will have those two sides going. One of the questions for us at the moment is we source our bourbon and our rye from MGP in Indiana, our column distilled bourbon and rye. And the quality of those whiskies are fantastic. And we really do feel that they bring a lot to the overall whiskey itself. We will look at, we've laid down contracts with them for up until 2028, 2029, 2028. We're still deciding, do we continue to do that afterwards, or do we actually start distilling our own bourbon and rye on the columns instead of doing the contract distilling? So we have a lot of flexibility there. But as regards our triple pot distilled whiskies, they will be released as SKUs on their own. And the core we call the Irish American and the Irish Plus bourbon will continue to be released as well. Okay. But it for me, where I come up with something like that is the 10-year-old single malt that we do. We've sourced that through Great Northern Distillery and finished it in Malaga wine bars. But that's old Cooley stock. And by 2026 release, that will be Great Northern Distillery double distilled malt. And it's different. Yeah. It's beautiful, but it's different. And the question I have in my mind at the moment is, do I blend that slowly over the years so that the change isn't a very obvious change? Or do you actually take that jump and go, this was Cooley, the next one is Great Northern? And that's a question that there's no wrong answer to that. As long as you're transparent about what you're doing, then there's no wrong answer. But I still haven't determined that in my own mind yet.
It's a fantastic point. I think he just nails that. And it is a question at the minute that a lot of distilleries who are planning ahead for their own distillate or their own whiskey to be released, but are also sitting on source stock, what they do. I mentioned earlier McConnell's. They obviously have sourced GND stock at the minute for their blends. They're now thinking ahead, even though their distillery is just about to open in Crumlin Road. They're wondering, do we outright say, okay, our blend is now slightly different, we're now using our own distillate, or do they create a Belfast Distillery Company release, which is the official name of their distillery? So Ecklinville are the same. Yeah. They're having that conversation, Barry, as you mentioned earlier, about sourced versus their own.
And they'll, like, for example, Ecklinville Distillery have talked about using Dunville's as their sourced brand,
Sourced,
and
yeah.
Ecklenville whiskey being their own distilled whiskey.
Exactly.
And then there's other distilleries that have already started to make that shift. So we come back to this distillery's dilemma about inaugural whiskey. Many of them are planning many, many years in advance as to what that's going to be, so that this jump, as Brian Nation talks about it, is there a jump from one flavor profile to another? The likes of Tullamore Distillery. Tullamore have been quietly, with no fanfare at all, moving from entirely sourced whiskey to almost entirely in-house made whiskey. So over the last 5 years at Tullamore Distillery, they've been making hot still, malt, and grain whiskey, which they were previously sourcing from Middleton and Bushmills, and now they have I don't think it's complete, but I think it's almost all in their regular core blend is almost all Tullamore distilled stock.
Yeah.
And they have tried to replicate the flavor profile. Clonakilty is doing the same thing. Clonakilty has already started to reduce the amount of malt that's going into some of their blends, sourced malt, and they're replacing it with some of their own pot still that they've distilled in-house. And so again, this is the dilemma, to Brian's point: jump, change flavor profiles, or try and keep the flavor profile that people have come to love. It's a successful product, and try and replicate it with our own stock. If I was to go back, and I'll stop talking and let Lauren talk. If I was to go back to 1966, between 1966 and 1975, Middleton Distillery had the same challenge, which was how in a new distillery could they replicate the flavor profiles of the Powers Distillery, the Jameson Distillery, while retaining the flavor profiles of the Murphy Distillery in County Cork. And so we're seeing it all over again now.
Yeah, I actually think, again, as long as a brand is transparent about what they're doing, that's the most important thing. There's so many skilled distillers and blenders out there that even if a brand did shift from sourced stock to their own distillate and their own stock, they could match it very closely to the existing flavor profile that people knew and loved. So that wouldn't be an issue, but it's just whether or not they would decide to make that jump and outright say, actually, listen, from now on, our labels are going to be a little bit different. You might notice a slight change in flavor profile. This is now our own stock versus the one that we sourced for X number of years. It's really, really interesting. And I think actually, I don't think it's a negative thing at all. I think it actually opens up the space for really interesting releases and a new story for a brand like Ecklenville. With Ecklenville whiskey, there's a completely new brand, but everyone has known and followed the Domvilles brand. They know it's in very capable hands with Jarlath there. They know we know he's the financial director, but he does a bit of everything. They know it's in very good hands, and they trust that it would be great liquid. So that they've got their fan base already through Domvilles.
But would it not keep you up at night as a distillery owner if you have spent, in the case of Ecklenville, 9-10 years building a brand arguably on the back of heavy fortified wine, finished whiskies, and then you say, you know what, we're actually going to make a leap now. It's actually going to be bourbon aged pot still whiskey that we're going to release that is maybe at odds with what people have wanted up to now and what they've bought. That would keep you up at night. Or if you can afford to run them both together, maybe you solve the problem.
Exactly. Yeah, it's I mean, Ted makes another great point there. Do you have faith in your own liquid and you just straight up say, right, okay, we're going to sell out all of our existing stock. We're going to let that flow through. And then from this date onwards, it will be our own stock. And you just go with that. And you've created a new beast. I would not want to be in any of these positions and making any of these decisions about releasing whiskies, because it sounds like a lot of factors to consider.
What we have very cleverly done here is we've created this little platform where whether the industry is going up or going down, we still get to turn up here on a Friday and talk about it. So we wanted to keep going up, but our perspective is not based on it only going up.
No, we're the wee grannies sitting in the corner of a cafe just nattering about all this stuff going on that doesn't really directly impact us. Well, it kind of does, in fairness, but
it does. No, I mean,
it definitely does.
I also run a whiskey company as well. and I deal with this kind of these thoughts as well of how to get to market and what to do and what'll work. I don't have a distillery expense behind me to worry about. I'm curious though, from those who are watching, and I'd love to know, what do you think an inaugural release for the distillery should be? Should it be a higher priced, one-time, limited run item? Should it be a stake in the ground? Here's what we're making. It's now a core part of our range. It's priced favorably for everyone right out of the gate. Is there somewhere in the middle, or does it vary based on some other factor, emotional, story, connection, family connections, or ancestry? I don't know, but I'm curious to get the thoughts from those watching. Like, what do you think, Lauren? Like, as you follow and get, like, we get emotionally connected to brands as we meet the people and we have a drink with them, and suddenly you're like, oh, I like her, I like him, I'm going to support them, and now suddenly we're bought in, right? We've heard the story. Does that sway you to want to spend more on their inaugural release, or what would your decision-making criteria be for a new release?
I honestly think there would be a lot of factors that would come into play there. Loyalty is a big thing. Like, you know, if you like a certain person, if you like a brand founder or a distiller, of course you want to keep up with them, you want to support them, and you probably would spend maybe a little bit outside your budget just to support them, because that's how it is. I genuinely think, and this is how I've based most of my whiskey decisions and certainly whiskey purchasing decisions, is if I like the liquid, I will buy it. If it's what I consider to be a good price for a whiskey, and I think, yeah, okay, that's great, I'm going to buy it. Yes, of course, the loyalty factor comes in there, and I have certain brands that I just am enamored with. But I think it all comes down to, a lot of it's in the moment as well. Let's be honest. Like, if you're in a lovely bar, you've had a few whiskeys, had a few pints, and someone's regaling tales of their distillery and their brand, and you're like, God damn it, I'm in. I'll buy this. Definitely
Make my money.
depends. Yeah, exactly. It's like, yep, let's do it. Doesn't matter. I just want to bring up something there as well, because I actually also thought this too, but we talk so much we move past points. Fat Daddy said there about, if a brand switches from source to their own liquid, it puts people on alert to judge the difference. That's a great point, but being brutally honest, I genuinely don't think there would be enough trained palates. So let's say a brand didn't announce that they changed from sourced to unsourced. I don't think there would be many people who would genuinely notice it, truth being told. And I think it's a case with a lot of things, certain batches and things like that. I think you would have to be highly, highly trained to really pick up a very subtle difference in a whiskey, but that's just my opinion.
And I would agree that if you're trying to replicate the flavor profile of the sourced thing, then say nothing about when the fully in-house product is on the market, because as long as people are getting what they like the taste of, it's only going to open up a can of worms, isn't it?
100%. No, he's spot on with that one. It is. It's people are looking to find a fault in it and be like, I don't like this. This isn't as good as it was before.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's a frust. I mean, folks, I like, we're not hopefully coming across as being critical or depressing about it, but we both wanted to highlight the dilemmas that are facing distilleries right now, because we're consumers as well. Like, we buy our whiskeys, but we also have some kind of we have a big responsibility, Lauren, don't we, to the distillers, like to share what we know about the industry and the dilemmas that are facing them, so that it kind of helps the decision making of the consumers along the way, right?
Absolutely. And I think as well, we, as you said at the very beginning, Barry, we try very, very hard to be fair to everyone. And I honestly do think it's important to highlight the incredible industry that we have here in Ireland, the phenomenal people behind it, their stories, their journey, and give everyone a fair platform. If people want to buy into that, fantastic, that's great. If they don't, it's not for them, they'll find another brand. I think largely we try to be as unbiased as possible, I think, and we we certainly don't sit on the fence, but I think we are fair in that we will give things a bit of hell if it could have been better, and we'll highlight the things that are really good.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, ultimately we do have a community, and for some reason people do tend to listen to us.
And look, there have been times where I've gotten into trouble within the industry for calling out what I thought was non-community aligned behavior and practices that just don't align. And maybe there's certain brands or bars that don't want me near them because I've shared it. But I think at the end of the day, we have to be honest about what's right and wrong as well. Like from our perspective, doesn't mean we are right or wrong, but what we think is right or wrong from our perspective. But back to Ted's point there as well, like build the brand, he recommends, and then get cask number 1 in a fancy bottle at a premium, rest the first batch at a good price as the core liquid so the brand building doesn't go to waste. And that building the brand, to me anyway, is build the community. Build the community and let the community do the work for you. When we shared earlier, Lauren, the Facebook groups, Cult, the Killoan Cult and Two Stacks Nation, both of those Facebook communities have more than 1,000 people each. And both of them were built not by the distilleries, but by fans of the distilleries and of the brands who wanted a place to talk about a thing they became so passionate about. There are other communities out there that brands and distilleries build themselves that don't get 10% of the engagement because why? They haven't built the community. They just built a Facebook page.
Exactly. I couldn't agree more with Ted. I think if you don't have a brand and you don't have a community, you're not personable, you don't engage with the consumer base, you're setting yourself up for a very tough time with your inaugural release and building your brand in the future. Someone mentioned earlier, like, you can't just come out with a brand, be like, hey, this is who we are, this is what we're selling, with nothing prior. It doesn't work. With all the noise that's going on at the minute in the industry, it just gets lost, and that's the reality of it. So I couldn't agree more with Ted, and I love the fact that Tom has gone through 11 bottles of Powers Rye
Today.
Perfect example of a great whiskey tonight.
That's a lot to go through in one day. Yeah, you want to watch out there.
Easily done. I can see why, but yeah, that's. I mean, my God, I've shouted about my love for it for so long. That's a perfect example of a great whiskey that's a little bit different and came to market really well. I know it's a big brand.
Let's not ignore the economics of.
I was just about to say, I know it's a big brand. They have a slight advantage, but it has become so many people's daily drinker because it's a great whiskey.
So what I'm hearing from you is spend about 200 million on building a plant 100%. In 1975, and then put another 200 million to brand building. And then 100%. Have the economies of scale of producing column distilled grain, and you're gonna have a great and somebody's gonna drink 11 bottles.
only way to do
it. Look, I think we're all on the same page. It seems like you all want to connect. You love the people, and when you connect with the people and the brands, we've seen this at so many junctures in our various businesses: Irish Whiskey Experiences, the Bus, Stories and Sips, Irish Whiskey Auctions. People do business with people, and when they meet the people behind the pours, they tend to buy and tell people about it.
Yeah.
Everyone's agreeing with that, but also I think there seems to be a willingness to spend more for something to support, and that is exclusive, but also make a core version available at the same time. It almost seems like we've solved all the dilemmas here. We just need to send this on to all the distilleries.
I think we have. Well, we'll create a PDF, a 1-page document that we just
with all the comments. Just all the comments in there. We'll paste all the comments in, send it to all Irish distilleries, and that's it.
And all Irish distilleries. It's like, hey guys, here's your consumer research. Off you go. Here's a pile of comments.
Scientifically tested consumer research. Go for it. So we got onto this topic because of the inaugural release of Roe & Co. this week and the unexpected controversial discussions around the pricing. Yeah. We thought it was quite favorable based on what it was cost to produce it and the work that went in at €85, and others thought that's 40-50 euros too expensive. Back to your point, you can't win, but I thought it merited a discussion tonight, didn't it?
Yeah, I think so. And it's great that every week we're almost inspired by what to discuss on the Shebeen, thanks to what has happened in the whiskey world. And that, I mean, that was a great prompt for this week for us, certainly. And we've talked for an hour and a half about it and solved all distilleries' problems, so everyone's a winner.
See some folks there in the comments taking notes. We know which distillery you represent. Don't worry, we know. I won't give you away. Fair play. We're looking forward to your release, though. Your inaugural release. Kevin says, since you've solved all the dilemmas, any updates on the whiskey cruise? Lauren, you're the Irish Whiskey Experiences manager.
I am, but Barry, you're our designated pirate in all of this, given your given your previous career experience in this field. I don't know how much we want to release. I want to kind of keep it close to the chest for the time being until we have more solid answers, but we will make it happen.
Could we tease? Will you give me permission to, and then you can shout stop if I go too far?
So are you teasing potential month, potential year, or
more conceptual?
I mean, we could do that. The general idea of a whiskey cruise is, do you want me to do it? I'll do it.
Okay. I'm passing from pirate back to pirate queen.
You can fill in any blanks that I may miss here. So
okay.
Generally what we would love to do and what we're aiming for is a 7-night cruise where we would bring brand representatives of varying roles, perhaps ambassadors, perhaps founders, who knows, on board to do tastings, certain events, the Pepsi Max, events on board the cruise liner itself, the cruise ship itself, and also create some really unique port experiences. So wherever we dock for a day, for an afternoon, we would work with local bars and restaurants there to come up with really cool events. And that is the overarching aim of what we would like to do. And we think it would be amazing, something mad, but something different. And we're working on it. We're working on it behind the scenes. Our resident pirate, as I said here, is very experienced in this field. So
can I add in that this is not a thing that would work around Ireland. So this is not a cruise around the Irish coast, but rather imagine, hypothetically, let's say it was a cold time of the year for a good portion of you Americans. Wouldn't it be nice to get somewhere where it's a little bit warmer for 7 nights?
Yeah.
Maybe a little bit of sun. And wouldn't it be nice if from wherever you were in the US, you could probably take one domestic-ish flight, and maybe there's a Caribbean cruise in there for 7 nights with some interesting activations. Who knows? That's just a thing.
And it might be 2025. It's 20. It's not too far away. It might be 2025. Who knows?
It could be within the next 18 months. But there's no way we are doing this in the British Isles, in Ireland.
It's not happening. It's not happening
feasible.
in Europe.
It's not practical. It is completely impractical for so many logistical and financial reasons. I can tell you that. I know this. I can tell you, it doesn't work. So rather, I would like to gather people in a place where we're not worried about 7 shades of snow and 18 shades of rain coming down on top of us, but we're more worried about, can you move the umbrella there to give me a bit of shade?
Exactly. And you don't have to pack for 4 seasons.
No, just the one.
Which is generally just the one. So that's the consensus. Definitely not Ireland. You could certainly do smaller scale cruises in Ireland, but I mean, why would you want to? When there's places we don't want to cruise Ireland.
We have buses for that. We have buses for Ireland.
Exactly. you don't want to do the North Sea in February.
Yeah, and then we're going to
We
do
don't have death wishes over here.
and we'll end in the Bay of Biscay. We'll end in there at the end of it.
So yes,
yeah, that's something that we're
a
exploring.
warmer climb. I think we've said enough. There will be so relevant brands on board, hopefully.
Anyway, we've no more to share on that for now. But we also are working on other interesting experiences. We have a few things we're working on 2024 for private whiskey groups and kind of, you could almost call them a private charter of a whiskey bus in 2024. We've sold out of all of our public events so far for 2024. We might have some standalone experiences to still announce for 2024 that we have coming. But then 2025, I think we're going to open up some more interesting week-long excursions that might revolve around a brand, might revolve around
one brand in particular.
But it would be an amazing deep dive. We have a great idea of something. And then there will be more whiskey experiences via bus, like 7 days, many distilleries, many brands. Like those are lots more coming.
Yeah. Exciting times. It's great that we have more often than not, we have to decide who not to visit and what not to do when you're planning trips, because there's areas you go to and there's just so many brands and opportunities there and it's hard to say no to people as well. I mean, I think certainly the itinerary for the Northern Whiskey Lights bus in September, like, it was hard to fit everyone in because there's so many, but because you're in such a small region, you just couldn't leave anyone out. So we're very lucky that we have so much choice and so many opportunities and so much potential to work with incredible brands, and we're very thankful, very lucky.
I don't know about you, Lauren, but I would love before September, which gives us what? So that's 5 months away, 6 months away. Before September, that we might have saved the dates for a whiskey cruise.
Definitely, because it gives everyone enough time to plan, to book annual leave, to book sort of holiday vacation time, and it's good for us as well, just to kind of for our own diaries and our own brains and what to prioritize and what to put first. So definitely by September we'll have a few buses and maybe a boat announced.
Yeah, nobody ever accused us of dreaming too small anyway.
Never.
So folks,
we always said at the beginning of this we'd dream big, so
that's it. I think we've covered a lot. We've talked about inaugural releases, we've talked about whiskey buses and boats, we've talked about stories and sips whiskeys, and tomorrow we will have a registration link available for those of you who want to take part in the Method and Madness tasting event, where we'll ship you a whiskey tasting kit on March 11th, wherever you are in the world. If you're not yet a member of Stories and Sips Whiskey Club, just go to storieandsips.com. It'll cost you $20 to register as a member, and you can cancel anytime. There's no commitments. Come, stay, leave. We just love to have you experience Irish whiskey. And our club members are getting access to 3 Method and Madness whiskies, one of which has never been released in the US before, the Virgin Gariana Oak. And you're going to be led on a sensorial journey of those 3 whiskies by Barrett Stapleton, the head distiller of the micro distillery that produced the whiskies that are going to be shared. So that link goes out tomorrow in your email. And also within the next 8 days, you'll have a link to order our new Stories and Sips Whiskey Club release from 2 Stacks, our first club blend that many of you are participants in producing, which we have here. Beautiful bottle, really proud of it. Gorgeous livery, turned out really, really nice. And then the cans as well, the 2 Stacks Stories and Sips Whiskey Club cans. I don't know of any other whiskey club out there that has their own can.
No.
I'm really excited about it. We have 300 bottles and 1,000 cans, so there should be plenty to go around for all of you as well. What else have we missed?
I think we've covered it all. Obviously, the next big thing for me, obviously for us, but what I'm working towards is obviously the whiskey bus in 3 weeks. So that's where all the focus and time is at the minute, just to make sure we pull off, and we will, of course, the adventure of a lifetime for lovely people.
What are you on that topic of the Wild West, the the wild, what do we call it? The wild,
Wild West, yeah.
oh yeah, the Wild West whiskey bus. What is there one stop or experience that you're most excited about? Putting her on the spot now. Look at the big glee beaming from ear to ear she is at the thought of it.
Do you know what it is? Can you guess?
Yeah.
What is it?
St. Patrick's Day Parade in Kilrush.
100%. Being at JJ Corey and meeting with Louise McGuan back in January there, my jaw hit the floor. I was not often lost for words, but I was genuinely speechless at what that woman and the team there have put into organizing our day there. It's like when you work with a brand like that and they pull out all the stops to make an afternoon or a day, in this case with them, just so next level, mind blowing. It's great. It's so nice for us to see as well. It's going to be brilliant. Kristen, I see in the comments, is I think dying over spending a day with Louise McGuan. It is going to be the best day. Just so much sort of blending. We'll be cracking casks. We'll be eating beautiful seafood. And we'll obviously be taking part in the St. Patrick's Day Parade on the back of a flatbed truck, fully branded. Myself and Barry and Anthony have costumes, and we're not going to tell you what they are. You're just going to have to wait and see them, either with your own eyes on the day or on social media. We're going all out. And
We're going all out.
I can't wait. It's gonna be great, crack. I honestly can't wait. Cannot wait.
Tom said he's most excited about the medieval dinner at Nap Oak, and that was a recent addition, a recent kind of upgrade to the experience.
Yeah.
That's a nice upgrade, thanks to the team at Irish Distillers, who have gone all out. And let me tell you, I sometimes I hate talking about our experiences, because I know that we're talking about them to people who aren't on them at this time, but hopefully you'll join on future experiences. But the medieval dinner is after an exclusive tasting with the master blender from Middleton, Dave McCabe, and they are drawing a sample of a whiskey from a cask that has never been sampled by the general public, and that may actually become a future release down the line for Nap Oak, and you're going to be the first to ever taste it. I was also talking to the team at Nap Oak this morning, and they shared with me how they've unearthed documents from back in the 1980s and 1990s, when early communications were started with Irish Distillers about creating the Nap Oak Castle brand. They had that 1951 whiskey that was sourced by the original Nap Oak Castle kind of founder, builder, and it was his son who approached Irish Distillers, and they have wonderful communications, letters that went back and forth that they'll share with us, to share the story of how the current Nap Oak Castle brand came about and the conversations that were had. And nobody in the public has ever heard these stories before, and we're going to get to see them. So it's going to be really, really amazing.
Can I just say, Brian, I am here for this level of dedication. Lisa's got her costume, and you're building your costume this weekend.
Is it Lego?
A Lego costume. That might be quite hard to get through airport security and on a flight. I'm here for this level of dedication. We understand that it's very hard to pack costumes into suitcases when you want space for, well, you don't need space for bottles, but space for merch and glassware and additional gifts. So I'm here for this dedication. That's great. I cannot wait to see the shape of us. We want us to, so there's a prize for best dressed person on the day, which is picked by Louise McGuan herself, and she will give you a special gift for that. But there's also, Louise was telling us, a prize for the best float in the parade as well. I think we've got a pretty good chance of winning this, because they're going to look at this flatbed truck and think, who are these pile of hooligans that I've never seen in my life before, that have invaded my tiny village in West Clare? Who are you?
And I heard that the prize for the best float is 3 pigs from the local field, which we get to take on the bus with us.
Have to get them shipped back to the US somehow. Oh my goodness me. Great.
Greg says he's not really a costume guy. Greg, I feel like you can do this. I think you can find something. I believe in you. I think you will
Me
feel
too.
left out if you don't have something. Give us a shout if you want some ideas or talk through it. But we can work with you. We can work with you.
I also have a few little props and
Yeah.
things that people can use, like little glasses and little Irish flags and things like that as well. So we'll all be well kitted out, well branded. I have no doubt about it.
Kristen wants to know if she can bring her karaoke machine. Kristen, I would say that it's less of a me decision and more of a 30 other people decision.
Yeah.
That, you know, I would say based on hearing you singing in the past, you don't need a karaoke machine. Your dulcet tones will carry through the bus.
There you are. But listen, there'll be plenty of time for it. The thing is with the bus is 9 times out of 10 you turn around and everyone is mouth wide open, drooling, sleeping on the window, against the window. So
this one's for you, Laura.
Like for the north. I mean, we could.
That'd be a bit of crack. We could, couldn't we? We could. There's one night where we might be doing something.
The final night, you mean?
No. Where it's a surprise night where they don't know, not the final night, but there's another night.
Yes. The surprise event.
That could be a bit of crack. That could be. I think we should.
That'd be a bit of crack. We could do that. We could just keep the theme the same, the theme of whiskey.
I like it.
Oh, Chris means for the float.
Oh.
That actually would be a pretty good shout. I'm not gonna lie, although I don't know. Are
the people of Kilrush? Are the people of Kilrush ready for this level of quality singing, though, Kristen?
Are they ready for the old triangle via karaoke machine? That is the question. Okay, Brian, leave that with me. I'll have a think about where we could do a costume night for the Northern Whiskey Lights bus. You've given me a challenge now.
I'm sorry I asked this question about 20 minutes ago about what your favorite night of the whiskey bus is going to be, and we're still here talking about it. We leave it at that.
What's your favorite? What are you looking forward to most? I mean,
really am.
Great in their own way, but.
Yeah, no, there are great days. I have two that I'm looking forward to. I can't limit it. I can't restrict it to just one. I'm really looking forward to our kickoff night at Napo Castle because I think it's a mixture of crack and history and incredible whiskey in a location that nobody gets to. We got our own private room in there for a tasting. Nobody gets that. And the second one is a surprise event we have planned on our first day in Galway. This is our second day in Galway. You know what I'm talking about. Where a how will I even hint at this? A shovel might be needed.
Oh yes. The never before done thing with a group of people, certainly.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm excited about the shovel.
Actually, that comes up there with mine as well, just because it's so wild and so different. Oh yeah. And we're not telling you what that is until we're on the bus because I want to see everyone's faces.
And they're all like, "Get me off the bus! Get me off! Go away! I'm not doing it.
I didn't sign up for this."
Right. Listen, we'll leave it at that. We've had a great night. We've talked about all kinds of things. We went down all kinds of rabbit holes. We solved the inaugural release dilemma for the future generation of whiskey distillers. They need look no further than this live stream to solve everything. And we've teased a cruise. We've teased karaoke on the back of a flatbed truck.
Yep.
And we have learned of people building costumes. It's a big night.
Big night altogether. I have a great crack tonight. That was a good one. We're not here next week now, in fairness, Barry, are we? You're away. I'm also away.
We're both away. We're both traveling. I'm in Ohio next week. I will be in person at this time in Ohio for a tasting event. I hope to see many of you there. I know I will. It's the kickoff night of our Ohio Festival of Middleton Whiskies, 7:00 Friday night next week. So I'm going to see you in person. we'll share a few pictures online of the event, but there's no Shebeen next week because we're traveling. So Sinead.
We actually only have one Shebeen left before the bus. That's wild. Time flies. March is a busy month. Anyway.
Right, we're going away. We're leaving you all. Looking forward to seeing you all in Ireland and in Ohio and online, wherever we get to meet you next. We love this community. It's an amazing community.
Great.
Thanks for joining us again tonight, folks. And we'll see you soon. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much, everyone. Great to see you. Sláinte.
Sláinte.